When you were at Cornell, what did you study?
When we were in school, we studied engineering, industrial engineering, operations research at Cornell, and in fact, that's how we started this business in school back in 2000, 2001, as many of you guys remember in the dot-com period. And I would say more than half of our class, maybe third of our class left school during that time, just dropped out and decided to start a company in our college town or move to the Bay Area to do a business. And we ultimately followed that path and started our business. We didn't leave school to do it, but we stayed in school and started our business out of our dorm at Cornell and literally built it out of school.
So how did you get the idea to start Parature? I mean, how did you know as a college kid that CRM was a big pain point for a lot of companies? How did you know that SaaS was the wave of the future? I mean, what was your inspiration for that? Because you guys were ahead of the game in so many ways.
Well, it's as you guys know, it's very natural to come out of college and start building CRM software. It took us maybe 2 years to figure out what CRM stood for when we started this business. But we had a very interesting story in when we started our business. We were very close to the Blackboard co-founders, the Cornell crew, not Michael and Matthew. They ultimately merged together in '01, maybe earlier, like 2000. And one of the things we knew in school was that everything was moving online. And one of the benefits of being in a university environment was everything was well wired ahead of, I would say, the consumer market. So everything was on a fast internet, Ethernet. And at the time, instant messaging was something you'd have to download, as you guys remember, like an AOL Instant Messenger. It'd have to sit on your desktop. And it was primarily because the internet speeds were too slow. And so for us, we had created in the university environment, when everything's connected on high-speed internet wireless, one of the first early completely zero-footprint web-based chat products that a student could just use on their computer. And it would run as fast as a locally installed instant messaging service. And our vision at the time, of course, being a student, all you could see is what you live in a day-to-day life of a student world. Was to team up with Blackboard to distribute this product as a collaboration capability for schools, so students could basically chat with each other on campus. That was the initial vision. And so we went ahead and built this product. And one of my co-founders in summer of 2001, earlier 2001, said, hey, if we're going to spend time building this product, why don't we put it online and let people use it as well? So we said, we didn't really debate with him. We said, that's fine, let's try it. So we set up a website and we said there's a free live chat, you can use it. And summer 2001, we had 400 or 500 companies sign up for our service. It was free, you can just sign up for it. And in fact, we had so much usage, we hosted all of our servers. Back then, it wasn't like today where everything's nice and thin. Back then, it was like towers. So we had all these towers in our dorm room, and they were all plugged into the free Ethernet, so we didn't have to pay. I know Tien has a hosting business, so back then we didn't have to pay. It was free. The campus paid for it. And we hosted all the software on there. And then in the dorm, there's no, at least when I was in school, there's no air conditioning. So I remember when it got pretty hot, the servers actually would overheat. So we took the fans that our parents gave us and put it around the computers to keep them cool as best as we could. But there was a lot of usage on there, and we wondered why it was the case. There was a lot of usage, so we realized a lot of these small businesses were signing up for our chat and using our service that we were hosting for them for the chat. And we called them all up and said, what are you using this for? And you'd hear some amazing stories. Everybody, all these small business owners would say, hey, we're a local small business flower shop all the way through. We're a new emerging retailer, and we've watched Amazon's success and eBay's success, and we just want to do the same thing. But their challenges were nobody knew who they were. Back then, more than 10 years ago, people still feel comfortable going to the mall to do shopping and not online. People were worried about fraud and credit card, and I saw a lot of presentations around threats and security. Back then it was far worse, right? People were scared to go online to buy things. And so nobody was really buying. People were browsing and then going to the store to buy it. And so the chat was very popular with these companies in that it humanized the experience. And for the first time as a consumer, if you didn't know how to return something that you bought, like a pair of jeans, you're just trying to get your money back, and you're not too sure how that process works for returns because you're used to taking it to the mall. And now you can actually use our chat to return items. So that started this whole business, and what really turned the curve out of the campus environment to this commercial use case was who would be willing to pay for it. So when we went back and we asked all of our customers, and ultimately the commercial customers said, hey, this is valuable enough that we would be willing to pay you on a subscription monthly basis for the service. And so we said, but then the next question was how much? So I'd say 80% didn't pay, 20% paid. And we started very low, just $5 per agent per month to get going, and that's how the business started.
Did you price it low to get wide adoption first, or how did you develop pricing? Or did you just kind of wing it?
We called them all up and said, what are you willing to pay? And some of them said, you're dreaming, we're never going to pay $5 a month, right? And we didn't, for us, we were 21, and we weren't that greedy. We just said, if you're willing to pay us something, we'll be happy with that. At least cover some of our costs and give us some money for food. We didn't have any expectations. Our competitors, there weren't a lot of competitors in that space that were focused on that market, but there were some emerging players for sure. And so you have some benchmarks as far as what the standard deviation is. But for us, we were more focused on getting traction. And if we were smarter and had raised money earlier, maybe we would keep it cheaper and try to get more customers. But it turns out, ultimately that may not be the best thing, because ultimately you may attract the wrong customer for your business. So that's something.
You mentioned raising money. At what point in your sort of infancy did you guys start taking money?
So we had an interesting path. We bootstrapped Parature up for the first 5 years. So from 01 to 06, we bootstrapped and had good revenue. In 06, we were about 5 million revenue. We were profitable, not very profitable, but profitable enough, and it's a recurring revenue business. So it's you can probably anticipate about 90% predictability into your revenue for the following year because of that, which is great for SaaS businesses. So it was in 06 where we had a competitor called Right Now Technologies that was building a large federal sales team here in the DC area, but they're based in Montana. And I would say they're about 10 times our size, maybe 15 times our size. Their sales team, they had 60 sales reps. We had 6, and we were building our sales team on cash flow. And they were a well-funded startup. And when we competed with them on deals, we did the math, we could win about 50% of the time. But then we were happy every time we would win and they had large contracts, so we were so happy we would go celebrate and do happy hour. But then after the happy hour, we would hear from their sales team that they didn't really care, that we won these deals. And I soon found out why, because for every one deal we won, they would win 9. And it was because we just couldn't get to the deals fast enough. And so it was a very simple math for us. We went to the VCs and said, hey, look, here's what we're seeing in the field. When we compete against Right Now, we can win 50% of the time. But we're losing because we're not at the table 9 out of 10 times. So we went to the VCs and said, we want to build a professional sales team and increase our distribution. But we knew if we had to do it on our cash flow, it would take too long. So the VC money was very helpful for us to hire a professional VP of sales to come in and build a professional sales organization. And so the way the math turned out, it took us 5 years bootstrap to get to 300 customers, paying roughly, say, $1,000 a month. And after the money came in 06, we raised a $13.5 million round from Valhalla and Sierra Ventures in the West Coast. It took us just 2 more years to double that, so it went another 300 customers, and then also double the price. So it went from $1,000 a month to $2,000, and then soon, very quickly, you're on a $10 million, $15 million run rate. So that money actually helped quite a bit and gave Right Now the squeeze. Started to compete with them on every deal. Yeah.
Before the VCs, though, you got some money, right, from angels and friends and family. So how did your thought process work in terms of, okay, you're right out of Cornell, you need money, you got to buy more servers, you got to pay for sales and marketing. So how did how did you fund sort of that initial first few years?
We met, one of the parts of the story is we met Ching Ho, who was our first angel investor, and he was the first angel behind Blackboard. So coming back to the Blackboard story, Blackboard was a very early customer of ours, and we were introduced through them, and at a conference we met Ching Ho. He was very helpful. He's very active locally in the angel community. He gave us our first tranche of angel capital to help us really use the money to buy some equipment and get the technology more professionalized, help us hire some really key early employees to help us build the business. And I would say over the course of 5 years, so it is true, we did have some angel capital. I would say maybe $1 million or $1.5 million angel capital really to help us with cash flow. And back then there was not as easy with the banks to get a technology credit line like it is today. And there was no Amazon. There was, half of these hosting facilities didn't really exist. So, we did a lot of that ourselves out of our office for the first 3 to 4 years. And it's just a very expensive business to do this end-to-end, to deliver the software and also to create the technology infrastructure to host the software and manage and maintain that with the SLAs. It's just a big part of the business to run that. So, but back then we didn't have that luxury, so we had to buy all the equipment and run it. So a lot of the cash was for that, to help us get that going.
So when you took the VC round, the first round, most of that was used for expansion, sales and marketing, hiring people?
It was pretty much all expansion, sales and marketing to grow the business faster, up to the point where in 2008, we were interested in raising money again. We actually ran into some issues. We had scale problems with our product, which you hadn't realized. Our software is a customer service software, and it's used by millions of end users. So for example, at the Washington Post, if you email questions to them as a consumer, they're managing all your questions through our software. They're using our software to respond. When we launched with Living Social, we ran into a lot of issues. I'll never forget this, I don't know if they want me talking about this, but they ran their Amazon.com deal, some of you guys remember. It was their first huge success. And their e-commerce systems failed because they didn't anticipate so much load. And then our system started to slow down because, of course, if you didn't get your Amazon card through Living Social, then you file a ticket, trouble ticket, and our systems were slowing down. And we have a multi-tenant hosted facility, so we we put Living Social on the emerging stack of companies, which we could predict their volume. And we didn't realize that day the volume would go up so much, and we were wondering what was happening. And it was a very difficult business to manage with Living Social because they couldn't give us any early expectations on what deals they were going to run that would be popular, because otherwise we would have some inside information. So we just have to go with their business model, and there was a lot of peaks and valleys. So there's a lot of stuff we learned in scaling the product that I wish we would actually spend more time putting more money into the product with that money. But instead, we turned it all into sales and marketing. So we went from a slightly profitable company to very unprofitable business for the first 3-4 years to build a revenue stream. And retrospect, back looking, I would probably spend a little more money focusing on managing the engineering and technology to make that in parallel as well.
Were you using AWS, Amazon, or did you still have your own equipment?
There was no Amazon then yet that was that popular, so we still had to, every time we set up a new system, we have to go buy the equipment. We have a hosting team that goes in the colo to set it up. It's a lot of work, a lot of work to run that.
A lot of CapEx too.
And a huge amount of CapEx.
So your second round, you spent a lot on CapEx for your...
So second round, when Excel came in 2008, so this was a great story. 2008, Excel found us because we powered about 20% of their portfolio companies for support. So when they had their meetings, they were hearing from their CEOs about Parature and that we were running their software. And so they contacted us and said, we've been hearing a lot about Parature. Are you looking for money? And we said, of course we're looking for money. So we flew out there to Palo Alto and presented to Excel. And very quickly, I think like 2-3 weeks, we got a term sheet. And so when 2008 came, we changed our strategy. We took some of that capital and put it into the technology to make sure that we stayed innovative and focused on scale. So we brought in a lot of engineering talent to help us scale the infrastructure of our software. Make sure that it could be balanced. And one of the things I learned was in business, building a software business, everything has to be in balance and harmony. You can't put too much weight on one side and really skew it. You really have to focus on making sure that everything is well invested in. So we quickly took that money, it was a $16 million raise, and put that money back into building out our engineering talent, which turned out to be probably one of the best moves we did because in the last couple of years, as we started our conversations with Microsoft, they're a very engineering, technology-focused company, and they value that much more than our distribution, because certainly their distribution is far greater than ours. So a lot of the acquisition reasons and value was around our technology and products, and a lot of that came in from the Excel financing.
So in total, how much venture did you guys raise in your?
$32 million of venture financing.
Right. And I remember when you guys did your first round, how many term sheets did you have? You had a bidding war going.
Yeah, we were lucky in the first round because the story was good, right? We had, the business was all there. It was just a matter of getting to market. I would say we had maybe 5 or 6 term sheets, and a lot of local VCs.
And what's the secret to getting that kind of interest, in a company?
You get invited to the CONNECTpreneur and be able to speak, augment your presence. I think one of the things I've learned the most throughout the last 10 plus years is, far more important is focusing on building a great business. I think is probably the best advice I got. In the early days, we went out and raised money because all of our friends could raise money pretty quickly back in the dot-com periods. But once the dot-com shut down, it was very hard to raise money. And a lot of people were raising money without really focusing on building a good business. And one of the best advice that I'd gotten from a lot of mentors was, focus on building a great business, and then maybe the VCs will call you. And I never believed that to be true because we focused 80% of our time on calling VCs to get funded. And you do need some capital, right? So it's especially in the technology business to get going. So you still need that first early break to get some angel financing in. But I would say maybe less so these days because it's easier to build a product than it was 10 years ago. Focusing on building a great business is the number one advice. Focus on running the business, getting your revenues in, understanding your cost model. One of the things that benefited us in the SaaS model, and Tien, your question about why we were early, we didn't mean to build a SaaS multi-tenant model from day one. When I look back at our business, because we were so bootstrapped in the early days, every one of our competitors at that time was build a software and sell it, fly there, sell it to, do the sales and marketing pitch, and then fly your engineers there and consultants to deploy the software. It's a very expensive business model. And when we had built our software, well, first we never knew that that's how you're supposed to sell software. We just said, here it is on the web, and go ahead and try it yourself. And if you like it, then call us back, and and then we'll give you the licensing and paperwork. And we never flew anywhere to see our software, see our customers. And the software was built as a multi-tenant software, so we took one database and re-architected it so it could scale to host hundreds of customers on one implementation. But our competitors, because they had a lot of money, what they would do is they would set up one stack, one database for every customer. So that for 2,000 customers, they had 2,000 implementations. When we had 2,000 customers, we had maybe like 40 or 50. And because of that, over 10 years, we were able to sell this product at a much cheaper price and still have better margins than our public company competitors. And I attribute that a lot to being bootstrapped in the early days and building in those not chosen constraints, but constraints you have as a business model to really figure out how to out-innovate your competitors at that time. So in other words, if we had a lot of money, if we had raised like $3 to $4 million up front, I probably wouldn't have tackled that problem. I probably would have just buy the products, buy the CapEx, do the CapEx and deploy the products that way. And we would have lost a lot of our competitive advantage. But because we were bootstrapped, it forced us to really think about how to change the game and deliver the solution in a much more cost-effective model.
No, that was brilliant. And the VCs at the time that were throwing these term sheets at you, were they experienced in investing in SaaS businesses, or was it kind of new?
It was, everybody wanted to chase the Salesforce.com dream. It was enough, 06 was still early enough. I think Salesforce had just gone public, and it was such a huge success in that business model, the cloud computing push, that every VC was starting to look at it. But fortunately, not every VC understood the metrics of running a SaaS business. A cloud computing business is a very expensive business model to run, partly because, as many of you guys know, the cost to run sales and marketing in a SaaS business is very expensive to hire a sales team up front, to train them, to get them to market. And then when you recognize revenue, you can't recognize revenue like on-premise license software. You have to recognize it ratably over 12 months. So your revenues, you're doing a lot of work, but your revenue looks small. And then meanwhile, your cost structure, you have to pay everybody up front, and not everybody will make it through as well. And salespeople are expensive to hire. So it is a very, very cash-intensive business to run a SaaS business model on the go-to-market side. And because of that, I think the VCs more the West Coast VCs are willing to take that appetite and say, okay, go. Well, here's the money and go try it. I think the East Coast VCs, their appetite isn't that strong to run that kind of bet on that type of business unless you're an experienced operator or have run something like this before. But it is a very high risk business, and at some point, a lot of SaaS businesses, if they cannot find the next round of financing, then that's pretty much it for them. So,
right. Well, you mentioned Salesforce.com, which is sort of the bellwether for the SaaS industry, and I think they still are. But they were sort of a role model for you. Then they became a competitor, maybe, and then partner again. So, to what extent did they influence, how you built the business the last 5 years?
Yeah, so Salesforce was always a company we admired. In '08, we almost sold the business to them. We would have been their first acquisition. At the time, they were interested in getting the customer service business. We ultimately said no because we were still pretty early. So we knew at some point that we would be competitive. And they ended up buying 2 companies in our space, 2 of our smaller competitors that became their service cloud today. And then they re-platformed and built everything. And they're a very strong competitor today. I would give Salesforce a lot of credit around their go-to-market. And for those of you that know Mark, he's an outstanding evangelist in the space for both cloud computing and CRM in general. But he's done a great amount of work for our space and our industry. So they are the poster child of success around cloud computing. But that being said, everyone's after their revenue base, their war chest of customers and all the money that can be made in cloud computing. So for us, it was always about brand and distribution. We had a very good technology that we rebuilt in the last 4 years, and we wanted to get to the market faster. But it would, again, take us a lot of capital. And to compete with Salesforce, it was increasingly more challenging because they could sell you this platform that had sales, marketing, and service all together. And we would come in with just a service piece. And we thought when we had better technology and service, but most CIOs today want to buy and standardize and deal with one vendor. IBM calls this one throat to choke, instead of buying best of breed and having to stitch together different solutions and manage different vendor relationships. So it was increasingly becoming harder for us. So our opportunity for us this year was in 2014, either go raise around Series C financing, or sell the business to a company that had the scale and the brand that could take our products to market faster. And when we looked at Microsoft, it was fascinating. They had brought over the SAP team recently in the last 2 years, and effectively had taken Microsoft Dynamics from the number 13th position to number 2 behind Salesforce as far as seats. They have 4 million seats of Microsoft Dynamics deployed around the world, and in markets that Salesforce wasn't in. And Microsoft had the scale and the brand. And so for us, it was really appealing to be partnered with somebody like that could take us to market much faster. Because effectively, if we didn't do that, we would have to try to do that ourselves. And that would be a lot of money to continue to build that out. So part of the process in figuring out how to compete with Salesforce is why not team up with somebody else that really wants to compete with them as well. And really the players in the space were Salesforce, Oracle, which had bought Right Now, our competitor, Microsoft, who was really interested in competing in the space, and maybe SAP and a few others. But there are only so many that want to go after Salesforce. And I think Microsoft has a really good opportunity here with the new leadership they have in place to really do this the right way.
So when you thought about selling, how much of that was driven by the venture capitalists? Because they were in year 6 or 7, right? And
Yep.
They probably wanted to see an exit. You guys hadn't taken large amounts of cash out, the founders. So was that a driving force? Or I know the company line is you wanted to compete against Salesforce.
Right.
And you wanted
Right.
to do it on a platform that's huge. But the real, the inside scoop, what was it a tough decision?
This is like Crossfire in CNN. You want to hear the real story. Every venture-backed company will have to have some exit at some point, right? And that exit could be either an acquisition or an IPO and then an exit, or some other recap or a new investor that comes in to buy the existing secondary shares out. And in our case, we had raised money since '06. Of course, we had earlier angel investors that were in it longer. But from '06 until this year, it's about 7 years, which is probably right in that vintage time frame that a VC looks for some return. So we knew at some point we would have to do something, either continue to raise more money and try to get this company public, or find a buyer. And this was actually an interesting segue in a great story. I was in February last year in Boston. We were raising our Series C with a Boston firm, and I won't name the firm. And they had a classic VC presentation. We were in there, about 20 to 30 partners, and doing our pitch, and we were going to raise $30 million in our Series C. And the founder of the firm, this is a very reputable Boston firm, founder of the firm says at the end of the presentation to me, to Ching Ho and me, and he says, if you don't take our money, what are you going to do with the company? And we said, well, if we don't take the money, we'll probably sell the company, because that's what our investors would like us to look at as well. And so he said, who are you guys going to sell it to? And we said, well, maybe Microsoft. And he actually leaned back in his chair, put his feet on the table, and started laughing really loudly in the room, sort of obnoxiously, and said, Microsoft would never effing buy your company. You guys are dreaming. And that's what he said in front of everybody. And then he came over and actually gave us 2 lollipops before we left and said, thank you for coming. And so, after that experience, and maybe it was karma, and literally a week later, we got the call from Microsoft. And they called, he had sent me an email and said, hey, we're in town and we want to stop by and say hello. And it couldn't have happened in a better story. It was like a Hollywood movie.
That's funny. And were you guys sort of building relationships with Oracle, Microsoft, potential buyers along the way, or did you just sort of wake up one morning and said, we got to go take on Salesforce, we got to sell the company?
It's a great question. A lot of people have asked me about that in the exit process. We had partnered with Microsoft for a couple of years, so they knew who we were. And in the last couple of years, what really drove their decision to buy us was, as we were competing in the field, I'll use an example. There's a company called Saba Software in the Bay Area. They're a public company, e-learning business. And they were using Salesforce. They had about 500 seats of Salesforce, and they really wanted to get off of Salesforce. So they came to us and said, hey, Parature, can you guys run all of our CRM? And we looked at their business model and said, we could do the customer care side, but you're going to have to find something for your sales and marketing portions of the CRM. And they asked us if we had any recommendations, and we said, you could look at Sugar CRM or maybe Microsoft. So they ended up, and we didn't know who they called, so they called Microsoft up. And next thing you know, we got a call from their CIO that said, we're ready to buy Parature. And I said, who did you decide? And they said, we bought Microsoft Dynamics as well. And so the salesperson of Microsoft Dynamics, I think ultimately started, the sales team started to see us and them more together. Microsoft and Parature together more to replace all of Salesforce. And ultimately, I think that visibility drove up top to the top of Microsoft. And their corporate VP, Bob Stutz, who ultimately did our deal, basically his field was telling him, we can actually win more deals if we have Parature. And so that led to them looking at the customer care space more carefully. And in an interesting set of stars alignment, and we thought this would go the other way, but Microsoft called us originally about a year and a half ago and said, we're going to hire somebody who knows this space to help us figure out what to do if we're going to build or buy this product. And we'll let you know when we hire the person. So I got a call 6 months later from them and said, we hired the person. We actually hired the head of products from Right Now, our competitor, after they left. He was leaving Oracle. And I remember coming back to our team saying, we're totally screwed. This guy, this company just bought, Microsoft just hired this guy who's our chief competitor, and he's going to hate us. It turns out this guy, for 4 years at Right Now, his job was to track competitive intelligence on our product. So he actually knew our products, probably better than I know our products. He knew our products in and out, because he was training their field sales team on how to compete against us at Right Now. And now he's sitting there at Microsoft, helping them advise them on what product to buy. And what I learned through this process is when you encounter a situation like that, it's very polar. Either they're going to hate you or they're going to love you. And in our case, it turned out that he really liked us and had a lot of great respect. And he drove the whole process. He was the one who, after he was hired on, he went to his boss and said, you need to buy Parature.
Right. So how did you get the auction going? Because you guys are masters at creating demand. So Microsoft's interested. They probably put a number on the table, right? So that's your baseline.
Yeah.
How did you get other interested parties? How did you get them to pay more, if you will?
So Microsoft, February of last year, initially contacted us, and then through the early I would say, dating process. We got to know their team, they got to know us. And then sometime in August, their M&A team got engaged with us and really stepped up the level of the conversation quite a bit. And at that point, for those of you guys who know this process, it's actually quite a bit of work as you start to engage into this exit process. I didn't realize how much work it would be, but it's almost a full-time job. And not so much actually for us. And we're probably in the beginning phases of just making sure the market opportunity is there with the buyer. But our CFO was crushed. Our CFO was basically not able to do anything in our business. Running it's such a huge distraction for running a business that we didn't realize. So one of the things that really helped, we did end up hiring bankers in August. And our board's advice was, look, this is going to be a lot of work if you guys are serious about going down this path with Microsoft. That's reason number one. Reason number two was, how are we going to keep these guys honest? There were 5 players in our space. Microsoft could have picked any one of them up. And how do we know that they were going to buy us, even though they said their initial, they went to everybody and told them that they were going to buy them. And they told us the same thing, but we weren't really sure. So keeping them honest was really important. Fortunately for us, one of our largest customers is IBM. And IBM, they're such a large deployment for us. And IBM actually has a provision in their contract that says if you're about to get bought, you need to notify us. So we had that in play. And so very quickly, the IBM team scrambled to get to the table at the time of deal. And the bankers probably brought another 5 or 6 companies to the table. And we ultimately got about 4 real offers. And I would say, to the bankers' credit, they doubled the price of our exit. So from the initial offer that Microsoft offered to where it ended up, it was double.
Where did it end up?
I'm not technically supposed to stay under my agreement, but you can probably Google it on TechCrunch.
News reports are in the 100 range?
Yeah, it's about.
Is that what they're saying?
It's pretty close to
Yeah.
Somehow people manage to get this information pretty easily.
So what are you going to do now? Are you cashed out entrepreneur turned angel, or are you going to stay and build this thing to destroy Salesforce? What do you want to do with this?
I'm focused on staying at Microsoft now and helping them run this business. Microsoft has put a big investment into our company. I shared with Tien earlier, one of the things they've done, and they're very thoughtful around this, is they've not only retained 100% of our business here, they're keeping us all out here as a subsidiary, which will be called Microsoft Parature. And they signed employment offers with all 120 of our employees, and in many cases, increased compensation as much as 100% for some of our employees. So they've been very, very thoughtful. And I joked with some of our younger engineers that are in their 20s, making 150, 200K is not bad in your 20s. I don't think I ever did that.
You guys were 100 greatest places to work for many years. So
yeah, and so now hopefully we'll be back.
You were underpaying your people the whole time.
I know. I started to feel bad. I told my wife maybe our employees hate us because we were underpaying them for all these years. And now that Microsoft is paying them so much money, and I told Microsoft, you're starting to make us look bad. But being a bootstrap startup, venture back, you have to run your business the way you can afford. And clearly we're not Microsoft.
So you're 30 days into this. This is the first 30 days where you haven't worked for yourself, right? Because you started your business out of a dorm room. So what are some of the experiences? Do you see yourself doing this for a while?
I would say this process is very much, for those of you who raised money before, is the 6-month honeymoon with your new, in this case, our new owner. But with the VC, I always call it the honeymoon phase, where the first 6 months, everyone's still very cordial and very happy, and the deal's done, and both sides are very excited. And so far, I'm still enjoying my honeymoon with Microsoft. I do have a boss, a real boss, and that may be a little different, but otherwise, it's very fun. And I'll tell you, one of the things that has happened quickly is we went from maybe closing 20 deals, 30 deals a month, to closing maybe 4 to 5 deals a day, and now the deal's announced. And our largest deal with prior, on average, let's say average selling price, say 50K or 100K, we get calls now from Microsoft's field sales team that they closed a deal for $2 million. Parature was bundled in to the deal, maybe worth like $250,000 of that $2 million. And they asked our sales rep to call the customer to do a courtesy demo of what they bought. So our sales team is actually calling up and doing demos, but the deal's already done. So just to give you a sense of brand and distribution power that these guys have that we never could enjoy. It would take us a long time to enjoy that kind of purchasing power. These companies like Salesforce and Oracle, right, and Microsoft really have that leverage in the marketplace.
Are you doing anything in addition to? Are you making investments now? Are you looking at some things?
I am looking at a few things. I haven't committed. I've done a couple of small angel investments here and there, and I haven't really dug into anything too deep. But I think my strategy for investing is going to be more like what I learned from Ching Ho, our investor, which is he doesn't do a lot of deals, but when he likes to do them, it's he gets more involved in the deals, and I think the value that he brings to the table certainly helped us quite a bit was to be able to have that hands-on experience of work with the entrepreneur. So I think that relationship that the angel investor brings to the table with the entrepreneur is what is most valuable, more than the capital. The capital is necessary, but it's more about the relationship that's built with the entrepreneur. When I look at what Ching Ho did with us and what he did with Michael Chasen at Blackboard, sort of fostering that process through the early stages, especially for a first-time entrepreneur, I think that's more interesting. For serial entrepreneurs, they're pretty much more independent. But for first-time entrepreneurs, I think there's a really huge opportunity there because you really don't know what you don't know. And they need a lot more hand-holding through the process. And I think a more experienced entrepreneur who's gone through the journey from the beginning to some exit can bring a lot more perspectives and be more helpful in those cases.
Right. And back to Microsoft before I turn it over to the audience for questions. But so your day-to-day role is it going to change a lot? Are you going to be more on the strategy side, on the marketing side?
Yep. So I'll continue to run the customer care business line for Microsoft Dynamics, based out of here, and Microsoft's sending a couple of folks out here to work with us as well. As you guys can imagine, we'll be busy integrating the products together over the next year, and over time, I'm being brought into more of these conversations now. They're interested. Microsoft Dynamics has bought 3 companies in the last 18 months. For this division. And Microsoft Business Solutions is run as an independent group outside of Microsoft corporate. And three acquisitions, we're the third one. They plan to continue to do acquisitions in this space. They've set aside a fairly large budget, even with Satya, the new CEO at Microsoft, who happened to have run this group in the past as well. And so the rumors of Microsoft moving more into the enterprise, at least from my vantage point, looks very real. They're seeing a lot of success in this area. And so I've been brought into some early conversations around what they're going to buy next, and maybe help them look at some of the products in the space.
So when are you going to overtake Salesforce? What's your prediction?
Well, it's according to Microsoft Dynamics numbers, based on seat counts, they're number 2 in the space, next to Salesforce being number 1. And I give Microsoft, I think their strategy is very clear. They want to build a really good product, and they want to compete at a very aggressive price to get to market. And Microsoft has done that very well in certain product lines they've acquired in the past. So I think they'll really give Salesforce.com a run for their money, especially when Salesforce has not been profitable at the expense of their growth, which, again, SaaS is a very expensive business model to run. But Microsoft's advantage is $70–80 billion of cash. This business is an investment for them. They have their Office franchise and Windows franchise is a very cash flow positive business, and they're very willing to invest into this business. So I think it'll really get challenging for some of the key players in the space over time.
Yeah, well, good luck with that.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to open up the floor. Courtney's got the mic, and so does Dan. Go ahead, Dennis.
2 quick questions. Have you called the crazy VC up in Boston to give you the lollipops?
Everyone's given me different advice. Some people have said I should mail him some lollipops. I haven't called him. I may pay him a visit sometime. I did get a very nice email from him when our deal was announced, congratulating us. So I printed that out and put it on my wall.
Anything you would have done differently in this past year or so, in this whole process?
That's a good question. I think in the exit process, one thing, I think for us, we were a little fortunate. It happened faster than we expected. One of the things I wish I had done is spend more time building more relationships leading up into the exit, because you just never know, who else could be a potential acquirer. And an acquirer values your product, your revenue, your team, but more importantly, I think it's the people that really they value the most. And a lot of these things, when you go into an acquisition, it's very hard for somebody to want to put a term sheet out to buy your business if they don't really know the team. And those things take many years to build. And so for us, fortunately with Microsoft, we had a relationship with them. Some of the other folks that they brought to the table were very good acquirers, but the chemistry, the team, either both sides, we didn't feel comfortable with their teams as well, or they didn't feel as comfortable with us. Those things you just don't know unless you go out and you take a look. So I encourage the entrepreneurs, at least in the enterprise software space, to spend more time going out, attending these, your potential suitors, their conferences, get to know their people earlier in the process. Try to meet them and get a good sense. So when you do get the call from one of the buyers, that you pretty much have everybody else, pretty quick, ready to go if that does happen. And in retrospect, I think leading up in the last year, had we had better relationships with some of the other potential acquirers, even the ones that didn't end up at the end of the table, would have been something I would have done differently.
A question for you. In your new role in Microsoft, do you guys see you getting into areas or market sectors that before didn't have the money to use a service like Salesforce? And are you worried that customers that may have looked at you guys because you weren't may not go that way because they're like, oh, they're part of Microsoft, they're going to be too big and expensive too?
Yeah, it is a question that this week, I'll be in Las Vegas for our users conference, and that's one of the first questions that our customers have is, we have several hundred customers that use Parature and Salesforce.com together, and will we continue to support, an open integration with some of Microsoft's competitors? And the answer is yes, we will. Microsoft has taken a very different stance on this. They've been very open on their APIs, and they'll continue to support all the integrations we have in place. And even if new customers come to us and they're using Salesforce and they want to use us for customer care, we have the integrations built and we'll continue to support that. I think Microsoft realizes that they just can't be a closed environment and only force their customers to standardize on Microsoft only. In the enterprise software space, with the best of breed vendors out there that have done such a great job, from Salesforce to Workday, say on the ERP side, you're going to have to figure out how to work in an ecosystem that integrates well into everything else. So that attitude and culture, from my observation, I'm pretty new to Microsoft, but looking at talking to their leadership team with Bob coming in from SAP, they certainly have changed their perspective on that quite a bit. So we'll continue to embrace integrations and partnerships with even their competitors as well. And there's a rumor that maybe the Windows phone might be supporting Google Android, for example, coming out. So that's the level of openness I think they're willing to pursue moving forward.
Another question? Bob Nelson
Bob
first.
only gets one question.
For the entrepreneurs in the room who aren't planning an exit for the future, you weren't planning an exit at the time, what would you say, looking ahead several years, that you should have done or they should be doing?
I would, coming back to the earlier question, Bob, I would say, if you're thinking about an exit, you need to start early. It's the same advice I give to venture financing. If you're thinking about raising money, unless you're in a space that's so hot and you're making so much money hand over fist, it's less likely for a first-time entrepreneur to walk into a VC first time and just get funded, unless they've done it before. So even in our process leading into 06 and 08, 08 not so much as 06, but I would say there's about 2 years of courtship that happens prior to that. And again, it's not all one way, right? It's not all about you going into the VC and convincing the VC to fund you. It's actually very mutual. You want to go in and get to know the VC partner as well from an entrepreneurial side. So speaking with the entrepreneur hat, and you want to make sure you're comfortable with them as well. And that process just takes some time, for you. And I encourage people to talk to as many VCs as possible. When VCs reach out, just go have a coffee with them and meet them. It doesn't have to be very formal, because there's a lot of other advantages that come to the table, right? They might introduce you to some of their portfolio companies. They could be existing customers. VCs may move on to other places, and they may help. They may be a buyer for you later on. Who knows? So these relationships are very valuable. In our course of raising money from 3 VCs and ultimately getting bought by Microsoft, I would say we probably pitched to 50 VCs around the US and ultimately settled with these 3, Valhalla, Sierra, and Excel. But we did formal pitches to 40 to 50 over the last 10 years and ultimately ended with that. So it just takes that much work, to make this happen. So I would say if you're thinking about the venture, the entrepreneur, as much work as it is to run the business, you have to dedicate some time to go out and build these relationships. And basically, I would say the entrepreneur's job is to create as many options possible for your business, to create the options and then make those options available when you need them. So that's what, I don't know, I can't think of a video game that does that, but it's basically like just putting as many pieces of candies everywhere where you can use them anytime. Like Pac-Man, exactly. So that would be my advice, is to dedicate some time to doing that.
So in Profile Health Systems, we're kind of at the beginning of the journey that you're telling us about. This is really fascinating, actually, to hear this story for me. My question is, in the very beginning, the early days, it seems like that's the hardest raise, is going from 0 to 1. So I'm curious, what kind of traction did you have before you got that first 1.5 million? Mm-hmm. And how did you meet this guy? How did that relationship come about? If it was chance, what would you have done if you hadn't met him?
Yep. So Ching-Ho we met because Blackboard was an early customer, and it served as a point of validation that our product worked, and Blackboard was paying us revenue for it, paying us money, so we're getting revenue for it. So it was a good validation for Ching-Ho to come in. It is clearly, I think, the hardest money to raise is that first round of financing. It's easier if you have a product and you have revenue in place, for sure. Maybe if you're in the Bay Area, you can get away with that, but I would say if you're on the East Coast, you probably need some revenue and some traction. If you're in a consumer business, you definitely need traction. You might not need to have revenue, but you definitely need to have some data points to traction to get that revenue in there. I think that's what you ultimately need is you need to have some proof points in today's world, because it's a lot easier to get a product off the ground. And I think the 3 things I always look at in raising money is, and I think a lot of entrepreneurs don't follow all 3. The first one is you need to go after a market that's big enough. So I think too many entrepreneurs think of an idea and the market is too narrow, or the market's not growing. So 2 examples, like in our space, customer service is an $8 billion market, and we're just a small sliver of a fraction of that market. But we could be in this business for a long time, and there could be 10 vendors in this space, and everyone could do very well. Or you're in an emerging market. I'll look at like the domains business in the last 10 years. 10 years ago, GoDaddy jumped in this business, and all of a sudden that business has grown so much, and it just became a multi-billion-dollar business. And that's possible too. So finding a really large market to go after is number 1. Number 2, I think it's all about the team. So your ability to attract the right people to run your business. If you have that in place, it makes it easier for you to raise financing. Earlier in this presentations, I saw some fascinating presentations from very experienced entrepreneurs, and that gets people excited, gets VCs, it gets me excited. So someone's been there and done that before. So if you can attract the people to come help you run the business, it makes all the difference. And then, of course, to do that, number 3 is you need to be able to raise capital. Because without the capital, it's probably unlikely you're able to attract the talent to come. And that just is part of the necessary part of building a great business, is for technology business particularly, is to raise the capital. So I always tell entrepreneurs to follow those 3 things. Find a big enough market. Number 2, be able to attract the people you need to build your business in that phase. And number 3, go out and raise the capital. And raising the capital, part of it is having the team in place, but part of it is being able to prove that you are able to demonstrate some metrics of momentum and growth in your business. And I think you should be on your way to finding a good angel investor or early stage investor to help you get started.
Yep.
He asked the question I wanted to ask, actually.
Okay.
Yeah.
think we got time for one or two more, and then Bill Collins has a question.
Thank you. In the process, did you have investment bankers, entrepreneurs who had built and sold major companies on your board of directors, and how significant were your board of directors in that process?
So first question, we did have bankers. We hired bankers in August to come in. We had, similarly to the VCs, we had built a list of relationship with bankers over the last 2 years. So much so that we could probably just pick one and come in to present to the board so we could hire them. We ended up going with Canaccord, a Canadian bank, to help us with the process. The level of effort the board came in, I would say the board members all vary based on their experiences on exits. You know, some of them are better at building the business process. Some of them are more experienced on the exit. The Excel board director we had was very good at exits. In fact, he had sold a number of companies to Microsoft before. And that actually helped quite a bit from a credibility perspective, having a reputable VC on your board, and also having somebody that had relationships with the head of M&A at Microsoft and other companies we looked at was an advantage for us, for sure. And in fact, when we talked to Excel, Rich Wong is on our board. You know, one of the things he told me was, I actually asked him the same question the VC asked me in Boston was, you know, why should we take money from you? And Rich said to me, well, he said, you know, we would be very helpful for you guys at the time of an exit. And I said, oh, that's good to know, because, you know, I hadn't thought about that at that time, but, you know, when the timing came. And I don't know if you guys have ever been to Excel's office in Palo Alto, but Excel has these really nice offices in the middle of on University Avenue, and they're all glass windows. You could see like in everyone's room. And he said, so for example, look across the hall, and I looked across the hall from where we were sitting, and Steve Ballmer was sitting in there negotiating the Facebook deal at the time. And he said, see, for example, if we need to call Steve Ballmer, we could call him to help you with the exit. And that's a huge advantage, right? And you go to these Excel forums, and you know Mark Zuckerberg sitting on your left, and the Kayak CEO is on your right. So it is a really amazing experience if you can get into a top-tier VC firm. But specifically in this process with Microsoft, Rich knew the M&A guy really well. In fact, the M&A guy just lost 2 deals to 2 of his portfolio companies they wanted to buy, the same guy. MoPub was bought by Twitter recently for $300 million before they went public. And AdMob, which is his first deal, ended up being bought by Google, but Microsoft put it in a bid and ultimately lost. And so coming into this deal, when Mark Brown from Microsoft called to negotiate with us and our bankers, we would tell him one story, and we would be like, no, we're not interested for that price. And he would turn around and call my board member directly and say, you know, what's going on exactly? And of course, you know, we had to be really much in sync with our board, right, to stay consistent, and our board member would tell him the same thing. But it was actually more threatening to hear from Rich, because he had lost 2 deals from Rich before, and he didn't want to lose this deal the 3rd time. So the value of a very good VC that has relationships with your corp dev is immensely valuable. I think for the dilution that we took on from Excel, paid itself off in you know, multifold because of that. So I would encourage, you know, the VCs when you raise money along the way, you need to raise money from VCs to help you during those phases. And if you're closer to the exit or closer to an IPO, finding a late stage VC that can help you navigate that process to get to that ultimate outcome is important for the entrepreneur, at least in my experience.
Got one more question, Brad.
Hey, Duke, congratulations. Hello? Hey, could you talk briefly about the challenges of the cap table when you started and through the process? Because everybody wants equity. You, the founder, want to hold on to as much equity as you can. The VCs come in, they're all pitching their term sheet, their deal. So just, if you could talk briefly about that, because it's, I think for a lot of entrepreneurs, that's a big challenge of what they want to start out with and what they end up with. And congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. It's you know, I would answer this question differently from a first-time entrepreneur than a serial entrepreneur. You know, again, a serial entrepreneur may have more capital and may have more experience raising money in their next ventures. Being the first-time entrepreneur, I'll speak from that experience, since Parature was mainly that experience. The advice I got early on was, you have two different paths to go down. One, you can build a very successful business. There's a lot, within 10 miles of this hotel. You can build a really good business at a $5 million business or $10 million business. You can own the whole thing. You can build a $20 million business and take down a $3-4 million salary a year. And it's a very good business. There's nothing wrong with that. Then the second path is if you want to build a business and you want to build it really big, and you want to be famous and you want to own the market. That takes a different type of mentality, and it's all about time to market. So if you're more of the latter and you want to build something really big, ultimately for the first time entrepreneur, it's very hard unless you've got a product like Facebook, or Uber or Dropbox where you can raise money at tremendous valuations, and the VCs have the appetite for it. It's fairly hard to hold on to your equity, to hold on to the majority of your equity, in my experience, for a first-time entrepreneur. So you just have to accept that and go down the path and take that risk as you would as an entrepreneur. Take the risk and say, in return for the capital, if you know we're going to use your capital for, in our case, it was to increase our distribution and our revenue ultimately. If it's a calculated risk and it's worth a, say, 20% dilution hit to your ownership, you just have to take that bet as an entrepreneur. And ultimately, you may end up owning 20% of the business. You may end up owning 5%. Hopefully you own more. If you sell the company for $100 million or $500 million, you'll make some money along the process. You may not be worth $100 million, but you'll make some money along the process, and you'll probably go do it again, right? I think that journey is more interesting, ultimately, at least from my perspective, to have the opportunity to get the capital to build something bigger and faster and get the best talent and go to market. That was what made it exciting for me to do this business. I can't say I would be that excited running a $5 million business or a $20 million business, and it was $20 million every year, and we didn't do anything else except focus on doing that. My mentality was more of, if we're going to do this, let's get it big. Let's do it as fast as we can. Let's get the best people and build the best product. And that was the mentality we had. And every day, 24 hours a day, that's all you think about, from the time you wake up until you go to sleep. So if you have that, if you think that way, then I would say dilution is dilution. It's a necessary part of the process of building a great business. Take the dilution hit and raise the money and try to get it out faster and bigger than your competitors. And then go back and buy all your competitors and you'll own the market. So that would be my approach. Michael Chasen gave me a lot of that advice at Blackboard. He didn't own very much at Blackboard when it ultimately got bought by the private equity. But he was very happy doing it. He wanted to be the biggest player in the space. He bought everybody up in his whole space, and ultimately he was the last man standing, and owned all the revenue in that industry. But Blackboard is a well-known brand worldwide, and continues to do very well. So that was the ambition that he had, and he traded that all up for equity.
Well, I think we're pretty much out of time. Can you stick around? Maybe I think some people probably want to talk to you. But full disclosure, I've been an advisor to Parature for a few years, and I had the pleasure of seeing this happen on a front row basis. And I'm so happy for you and for Ching Ho and for your team, because Duke is really one of the good guys. He's just a humble, nice, and also brilliant and successful guy. And I think Microsoft is really lucky to have you. And I have no doubt you're going to take over Salesforce. I'm excited to watch that happen. But thank you so much for sharing your story, and good luck to you.
Thank you. Thank you.